Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
The phone call came while I was reviewing blueprints for a new apartment complex in downtown Denver. My mother's voice sounded unusually cheerful as she said, "Alfredo, honey, I need to tell you something about your savings account." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. "We spent 90% of your money to buy Diana House. $47,000. It was perfect timing, and she really needed our help." The mug slipped from my fingers, crashing onto the blueprints and staining them brown. My hand started shaking as the words hit me like a sledgehammer. Then something unexpected happened. I burst out laughing. 3 years ago, when I was 25 and working as a construction project manager, I opened that savings account with such hope in my heart. Every dollar represented hours of backbreaking work under the Colorado sun building dreams for other people, while slowly crafting my own. I had started working construction jobs when I turned 18, right after my father Robert suffered his massive heart attack that left him unable to work his city maintenance job. Those early years were brutal. While my friends went to college parties, I was mixing concrete at 5 in the morning. While they complained about homework, I was calculating material costs and managing work crews twice my age. But I never resented it. Family comes first in our household, and I was proud to step up when everything fell apart. My mother, Patricia, had been so grateful during those difficult months. She would pack extra sandwiches in my lunchbox and leave encouraging notes about how proud she was of her strong boy. When I finally earned my project manager certification and my salary jumped significantly, she suggested opening a proper savings account. "You work such long hours, mijo," she had said, using her pet name for me while we sat in her small kitchen. "What if there's an emergency and you can't get to the bank? Let me have access just in case. I'll never touch it unless something terrible happens." It seemed logical. I trusted my parents completely. They had raised me to believe that family members protect each other, that blood bonds create unbreakable loyalty. My father had always said that a man's greatest treasure wasn't money, but the people who loved him unconditionally. So I signed the paperwork without hesitation, adding Patricia as a joint account holder. The account grew steadily over 3 years. I lived modestly in a small apartment near the construction sites, driving a used pickup truck and cooking most of my meals at home. Every month, I deposited between $1,200 and $1,800, watching the balance climb toward my goal of $60,000. That would be enough for a down payment on a decent house in a safe neighborhood. My sister Diane was 23, then still living at home, and bouncing between part-time jobs at retail stores and restaurants. She had always been the family favorite, the baby who could do no wrong. Where I was serious and responsible, Diane was bubbly and charming. Where I worked overtime to help with household expenses, she spent her paychecks on clothes and makeup and nights out with friends. But I genuinely loved her. She had this infectious laugh that could brighten any room, and when she was happy, the whole family felt lighter. I enjoyed buying her birthday gifts and helping her with car repairs. I believed that my sacrifices were building something bigger than just my own future. They were creating security for all of us. During family dinners, we would talk about our dreams. Patricia would serve her famous enchiladas, while Robert shared stories from his younger days working construction before his heart problems. Diane would chatter about whatever drama was happening in her social circle. And I would quietly plan my future, imagining the house I would buy, and maybe someday the wife and children who would fill it with laughter. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was in my trailer office at the Meridian Heights construction site, surrounded by permit applications and worker schedules. The project was running smoothly, and I felt that familiar satisfaction of a job well done. When my phone rang and I saw Patricia's name, I expected to hear about dinner plans or maybe a request to pick up groceries on my way home. But the tone in her voice was different. Too casual. Too bright. Like someone trying to deliver terrible news while pretending it was good news. "Alfredo, honey, I need to tell you something about your savings account." My stomach dropped before she even continued. I set down my pen and gave her my full attention, already sensing that something was terribly wrong. "We spent 90% of your money to buy Diane a house. $47,000. It was perfect timing, and she really needed our help." The words hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe properly. The sounds of construction work outside my trailer suddenly seemed incredibly loud, hammering and drilling and shouting that made it hard to think clearly. "What do you mean you spent my money?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded strange and distant. "Well, we found this perfect little house for Diane. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, nice neighborhood. And the sellers needed cash quickly, so we could get it below market value. It was such a good opportunity that we couldn't wait." I gripped the phone tighter, trying to process what she was telling me. "But that's my money. I've been saving for 3 years. I know, mijo, but you're so strong and responsible. You'll earn it back in no time. And Diane really needed this chance. You know how hard it's been for her to find stability." The coffee mug slipped from my other hand, crashing onto the blueprints spread across my desk. The brown liquid spread across architectural drawings that represented months of planning and preparation. My hands were shaking as the full reality hit me. But then something incredible happened. I started laughing. Not a bitter laugh or a sarcastic chuckle. A genuine deep laugh that bubbled up from somewhere I didn't recognize. My coworkers heard the crash and the laughter through the thin trailer walls. Jake, the electrical supervisor, poked his head through my door with concern written across his weathered face. "Everything okay in here, Alfredo?" I waved him off, still laughing, still holding the phone while my mother's confused voice asked what was so funny. But I couldn't explain it yet. Not until I made a very important phone call to the bank. 20 minutes later, I was speeding through Denver traffic in my pickup truck, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. The bank representative had confirmed my worst fears with clinical efficiency. The withdrawal had been processed that very morning at 9:15 a.m., just 4 hours before Patricia called me. The timing was deliberate, calculated to prevent me from stopping the transaction. I pulled into my parents' driveway, with gravel crunching under my tires, the sound sharp and angry in the quiet suburban afternoon. Their house looked exactly the same as always. A modest 2-story with faded blue siding and Patricia's carefully tended flower beds lining the front walkway. But everything felt different now, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. Robert was sitting in his favorite recliner when I burst through the front door without knocking. He glanced up from his newspaper with the calm expression of someone who had been expecting me, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Patricia was standing at the kitchen counter, nervously organizing a stack of mail that was already perfectly neat. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "Sit down, son," Robert said, folding his newspaper with deliberate slowness. "Your mother told me she called you. We figured you'd want to discuss this." "Discuss?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "You stole $47,000 from me, and you want to discuss it." Patricia's face crumpled like I had slapped her. "Alfredo, don't use that word. We didn't steal anything. We're family. Everything we do is for the good of the family. Then why didn't you ask me first?" She exchanged a glance with Robert before answering. "Because we knew you would say no. You're too cautious sometimes, mijo. You don't see opportunities the way we do." I sat down heavily on their worn couch, trying to organize my thoughts. The living room suddenly felt smaller than I remembered, cramped and suffocating. Family photos lined the mantel above their fireplace, pictures of birthdays and holidays and graduations that now seemed like evidence from someone else's life. "Explain it to me," I said. "Tell me exactly what happened." Robert leaned forward in his chair, adopting the patient tone he used when explaining something to a child. "Diane has been seeing this boy, Marcus, for 8 months now. He's a good kid, works at an auto parts store, has his own apartment. But he told Diane that if she didn't get serious about her life and find her own place, he was going to end the relationship. So Diane came to us crying," Patricia continued. "She really loves this boy, Alfredo. And she's tired of living at home, tired of not having her independence. When we saw this house come on the market in Highlands Ranch, it seemed like perfect timing." Highlands Ranch, one of the most expensive suburban areas in Denver, where young professionals bought starter homes for twice what the same house would cost in my neighborhood. "How much did this house cost?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. $260,000, Robert said proudly. "But it's worth at least $280. The sellers needed to move quickly for a job relocation, so they accepted our cash offer." My mouth went dry. "You bought a $250,000 house with my money. With your money as the down payment," Patricia clarified. "We qualified Diane for a mortgage for the rest. The monthly payments are only about $1,800. Only $1,800. I stood up, pacing to the window. "Diane makes maybe $1,400 a month when she's working full-time. How is she supposed to afford that?" "Marcus will help," Robert said with a shrug. "And if they get married, they'll combine their incomes." I turned back to face them, seeing clearly for the first time how little they understood about money or responsibility, or the sacrifice I had made for years. "You gambled my entire future on Diane's maybe boyfriend and a maybe marriage. Don't be dramatic," Patricia said, her voice taking on an edge. "You're young and strong. You'll save up again. Diane needed this opportunity now. I needed that money for my own house." "You can live anywhere," Robert said dismissively. "You're a man. You're independent. Diane needs stability." The conversation was surreal, like trying to explain color to someone who had never seen. They genuinely believed they had done something reasonable, something loving. In their minds, my years of sacrifice were just preparation for this moment when I could sacrifice even more. "Where are the papers?" I asked. "I want to see the deed, the mortgage documents, everything." Patricia disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a manila folder. Inside, I found copies of documents that made my blood turn cold. The house was purchased in Diane's name, only with no legal obligation to repay me. The mortgage application listed her income as $2,400 per month. A complete fabrication. But the worst revelation was at the bottom of the stack. Loan documents bearing my forged signature, committing me to pay $12,000 in closing costs, title fees, and mortgage origination charges. My name was on debt. I never agreed to debt that would appear on my credit report and follow me for years. "You forged my signature," I said, holding up the papers with hands that were shaking again. Patricia looked genuinely confused. "I have power of attorney for emergencies. I can sign your name when necessary." "When did I give you power of attorney?" "When you opened the savings account. It was part of the joint account paperwork." I stared at the documents, realizing how completely I had been manipulated. The bank employee had presented multiple forms, and I had signed them all without reading carefully, trusting that my mother would never abuse that access. Now I was legally responsible for debt I never chose, committed to payments I never agreed to make. "This is fraud," I said quietly. "This is family," Robert corrected firmly. "And family takes care of each other. Your sister needed help, and you were in a position to provide it. That's how it works." I looked at their faces, searching for any sign of remorse or understanding. but I saw only the entitled certainty of people who believed they were completely justified in destroying my financial future for their daughter's convenience. The front door opened before I could respond, and I heard Diane's familiar laugh echoing through the hallway. But now that sound, which had always brought me joy, filled me with cold dread. Diane swept into the living room like she owned the world, her arms loaded with shopping bags from expensive stores I recognized but could never afford. Behind her walked Marcus, a tall guy with perfectly styled hair and the kind of confident swagger that comes from never having worked a day of hard labor in his life. "Oh, good, Alfredo's here," Diane said brightly, dropping her bags on the coffee table. "I was hoping I could thank you in person for your generous gift." The word gift hit me like a slap. I stood up from the couch, trying to keep my voice level. "It wasn't a gift, Diane. It was my life savings that you took without asking." She laughed, the same tinkling sound that had charmed our family for years. But now it sounded cruel and mocking. "Took. That's such an ugly word, big brother. Mama and Papa made a smart investment decision. You should be thanking them. I should be thanking them for stealing $47,000 from me." "There's that word again," Marcus said, speaking for the first time. His voice was smooth and condescending, like he was addressing a particularly slow child. "Nobody stole anything, man. Your parents made a family decision. That's how real families work." I studied his face, noting the expensive watch on his wrist and the designer labels on his clothes. This was someone who had never missed a meal or worried about rent money, telling me how families should operate. "You don't even know me," I said to him. "You have no right to comment on my family." "I know you well enough," he replied with a smirk. Diane's told me all about her uptight older brother who thinks money is more important than supporting the people he loves. Patricia nodded approvingly. "Marcus understands family values, Alfredo. Maybe you could learn something from him." I felt like I was living in an alternate reality where stealing was called generosity and theft was called love. "Diane, do you understand what you've done? I worked for 3 years to save that money. I lived in a tiny apartment and drove a broken-down truck and ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day to build that savings. And that was very sweet of you," she said patronizingly. "But you were being silly trying to save up for some perfect house that you probably never would have bought anyway. You're too scared of making big decisions. At least now your money went to something real." She pulled out her phone and started showing me pictures of her new house. It was beautiful. Hardwood floors, granite countertops, a 2-car garage, and a backyard with mature trees. Everything I had dreamed of having someday. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, and a huge kitchen perfect for entertaining, she gushed. "Marcus and I are planning a housewarming party next weekend. You should come see what your contribution helped create." "My contribution?" The words tasted bitter in my mouth. "You mean my stolen money, borrowed money," Robert corrected from his chair. "And Diane fully intends to pay you back once she gets settled." I looked at Diane. "Is that true? Are you planning to pay me back?" She shrugged carelessly. "Eventually, maybe, when I can afford it." But honestly, Alfredo, you should just consider it a family investment. Think of all the times Mama and Papa helped you when you were younger. Think of all the dinners and clothes and Christmas presents. This is just your turn to give back. The audacity was breathtaking. She was comparing my childhood needs to her adult greed, as if receiving food and shelter as a child created a debt that entitled them to my life savings. Marcus put his arm around Diane's shoulders possessively. "Besides, it's not like you really need the money right now. You've got a decent job, a place to live. Diane needed this chance to build something with her future husband. Future husband." I looked between them. "Are you engaged?" "Well, not officially. Diane said, batting her eyelashes at Marcus. But we're talking about it. Right, baby? Marcus made a non-committal sound that could have meant anything. I noticed he didn't look particularly enthusiastic about marriage talk, but Diane seemed oblivious to his lack of excitement. So you stole my money to buy a house for your maybe boyfriend, who might someday propose to you. Stop calling it stealing, Patricia snapped. You're being deliberately hurtful, Alfredo. This is about family loyalty and supporting each other's dreams. What about my dreams? The question burst out of me with years of suppressed frustration. What about the house I wanted to buy? What about my plans and my goals and my future? Diane rolled her eyes dramatically. You're 28 years old, Alfredo. You can start over. I'm 23. If I don't establish myself now, I might never get another chance like this. You could establish yourself by getting a better job and saving your own money like I did. Not everyone wants to live like a monk, Marcus said mockingly. Some people believe in enjoying their youth while they have it. I realized that to them, my years of sacrifice looked like foolishness. They saw my careful budgeting and modest lifestyle as character flaws rather than responsible choices. In their minds, I was the family member who needed to be taught a lesson about living in the moment. Besides, Diane continued examining her manicured nails. You were stupid to trust them with access to your account. If you were really serious about saving money, you would have protected it better. You practically invited them to use it. The victim blaming was the final straw. Not only had they stolen from me, they were now telling me it was my fault for being trustful enough to believe my own family wouldn't betray me. You know what? I said, reaching into my pocket for my phone. I think I need to call the bank and report this as unauthorized access. Robert stood up quickly, his face turning red. You will not embarrass this family by involving outsiders in our private business. You've already embarrassed yourselves by committing fraud. Marcus stepped forward aggressively. Listen, man, you need to calm down before you say something you'll regret. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you friendly advice, he said with a cold smile. This is a close-knit community. Your father still has a lot of friends from his city job, and word travels fast around here. If you start making accusations about your own family, people will remember that. It might affect your reputation, your work opportunities. You don't want to be known as the guy who turned on his own people over money. The threat was clear and calculating. They weren't just stealing my money. They were prepared to destroy my social and professional standing if I fought back. I looked around the room at these people I had loved and trusted, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. But then Diane made a mistake that changed everything. Oh, by the way, she said casually while digging through her purse. We found some old jewelry in your safety deposit box when we were getting the cashier's check. Most of it was junk, but there was this pretty little ring that we sold to help with the down payment. My grandmother's ring. The antique gold band with tiny diamonds that she had worn for 60 years of marriage, the one she had given me before she died with instructions to save it for the woman I would someday marry. The only thing I owned that had real sentimental value. You sold my grandmother's ring. Diane looked up innocently. Was that important? It was just sitting there not being used. We got $800 for it, which helped with the closing costs. The room went completely silent. Even Patricia looked uncomfortable, realizing that Diane had revealed something she shouldn't have. Robert cleared his throat nervously, and Marcus studied his shoes. But I was no longer angry. Suddenly, I felt completely calm and clear-headed. Because now I knew exactly who these people really were, and more importantly, I knew something they didn't know. I started laughing again, just like I had during that first phone call. But this time, everyone in the room could see that my laughter meant something very different from amusement. That evening, I drove straight to the bank and requested copies of all my account activity for the previous 12 months. What I discovered sitting in my truck under a parking lot streetlight made my blood run cold. This wasn't a sudden decision or a crime of opportunity. It was a systematic, carefully planned theft that had been going on for 8 months. The withdrawal history told a story of gradual manipulation. Small amounts at first. $200 in July, $300 in August, $500 in September. Each transaction was labeled as family emergency, or medical expense, or home repair. The amounts were perfectly calculated to stay below the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts to my phone, but the real smoking gun was waiting for me when I got home. Patricia had accidentally left her purse behind after our confrontation, and inside I found a small, spiral notebook that made me physically sick to read. The notebook contained detailed calculations in Patricia's careful handwriting. She had tracked my income, my spending patterns, and my savings rate with the precision of an accountant planning a heist. There were notes about my work schedule, a works late munterwed, sas fry, home by 7-2s cirction observations about my banking habits, a checks account online Sunday mornings, and estimates about how much money I would have at different dates. One page was titled Timeline for House Purchase and contained a month-by-month plan stretching back to the previous summer. They had researched property values in Highlands Ranch, identified potential houses in their target price range, and calculated exactly how much they could take from my account without triggering suspicion. Another section contained practice signatures, my name written over and over in Patricia's handwriting as she perfected forging my signature for the loan documents. The progression from shaky attempts to confident forgeries was documented in painful detail, but the most devastating page was titled Responses to A's Questions. It was a script they had prepared for exactly this confrontation, complete with justifications and emotional manipulation tactics. Emphasize family loyalty and his strength. Remind him of all we've done for him. Point out that he can earn more money, but D can't get time back. If he gets angry, make him feel guilty for caring more about money than family. R should stay calm and authoritative. P should be emotional and hurt. Every word of our argument had been rehearsed. Every tear, every guilt trip, every manipulation had been planned in advance. I wasn't talking to my parents. I was watching actors perform a script designed to make me feel bad about being robbed. The final pages contained notes about my safety deposit box and speculation about what valuables I might have stored there. My grandmother's ring was specifically mentioned with an estimated value, and notes about local jewelry buyers who paid cash without asking questions. I sat in my small apartment kitchen at midnight, reading this blueprint for betrayal by the light of a single lamp. These people had studied me like a mark in a con game, analyzing my weaknesses and planning exactly how to exploit my love and trust. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the address listed on Diane's property deed. The house was everything she had described. A beautiful 3-bedroom colonial in a neighborhood where the average home value was pushing $300,000. I parked across the street and watched as Marcus loaded boxes from a moving truck while Diane directed him with animated gestures. They looked happy and carefree, like a young couple starting their lives together. No guilt, no remorse, no concern for the brother whose dreams they had destroyed to fund their own. Diane was wearing new clothes and carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. A neighbor walked over to introduce himself, and I could hear Diane's voice carrying across the street as she explained that they were so grateful to my family for helping us get started. She was already spinning the story, making herself the grateful recipient of generosity rather than the beneficiary of theft. When I got back to my truck, I found a text message from Patricia. Mijo, please don't stay angry. We love you, and we did this out of love for Diane. Family is more important than money. Come for dinner Sunday. and let's put this behind us. The casual dismissal of my feelings was staggering. After stealing my life savings and forging my signature and selling my grandmother's ring, she wanted to have dinner and put this behind us, like it was a minor disagreement about politics. I drove to Robert's former workplace, a city maintenance facility, where he had worked for 15 years before his heart attack. Several of his old colleagues were still employed there, including his former supervisor, a man named Bill Hernandez, who had known our family since I was a child. "Alfredo," Bill said warmly when I walked into his office. "How's your old man doing? I keep meaning to call him." "That's actually why I'm here, Mr. Hernandez. I need some advice about a family situation." I told him the entire story, showing him copies of the forged documents and the notebook. Bill's expression grew darker with each detail, his weathered hands clenching into fists as he reviewed the evidence. "Son, this isn't a family situation," he said finally. "This is criminal fraud. Your parents committed multiple felonies against you, but they're family. Doesn't that make it different legally? Family relationship doesn't change the law. If anything, it makes the crime worse because they violated a position of trust." He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I don't know. I keep thinking they'll realize what they did was wrong and try to make it right." Bill shook his head sadly. "Alfredo, I've known your father for 20 years. He's a good man in many ways, but he's always had a blind spot when it comes to your sister. And your mother." He paused diplomatically. "Let's just say she's never liked being told no about anything. So you don't think they'll change? People don't usually change unless they face real consequences. Right now, they got exactly what they wanted with no downside. Why would they change?" As I drove home that afternoon, I realized that Bill was right. My family wasn't going to suddenly develop a conscience or acknowledge the harm they had caused. They were planning to continue living their improved lives while expecting me to quietly absorb the financial and emotional damage. But what they didn't know was that I had been planning too. Not for months like they had, but for the last 6 hours since I found Patricia's notebook. And my plan was about to turn their world upside down. That evening, Marcus called me from Diane's new house. His voice was friendly, but with an underlying edge of menace. "Hey, Alfredo, your sister wanted me to reach out and make sure we're all good. No hard feelings about the house thing, right? We're all family now." "We're all good, Marcus." "Great to hear it, because it would be really unfortunate if this turned into some kind of big drama. Your parents are respected people in this community, and Diane's starting her new life. It would be sad if someone's jealousy or resentment created problems for everyone." The threat was clear: accept what happened or face social and professional consequences. But I just smiled as I replied, "Don't worry, Marcus. I think everything's about to work out exactly the way it should." After I hung up, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to the private investigator I had hired that afternoon. The second was to the bank's fraud department. The third was to a criminal defense attorney who specialized in family financial crimes. By the time I went to bed that night, the wheels were already turning on a plan that would give my family exactly the consequences they had earned. They thought they knew me, thought they could predict my reactions and control my responses. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 days later, I was back at my parents' house for what they thought would be a reconciliation dinner. Patricia had spent all afternoon cooking my favorite foods: carne asada with fresh tortillas, Spanish rice, and her famous flan for dessert. The dining room table was set with their good china, and she had even put out cloth napkins instead of the paper ones they usually used. The whole scene felt like a performance designed to manipulate my emotions and make me feel guilty for being angry about their theft. Diane and Marcus were there too, both dressed nicely and wearing their most charming smiles. "I'm so glad you decided to come tonight, Micho," Patricia said, bustling around the kitchen with nervous energy. Family dinners are so important. This is where we remember what really matters. Robert was carving the meat with ceremonial precision, playing the role of the wise patriarch, bringing his wayward son back into the fold. Your mother put a lot of work into this meal, Alfredo. I hope you can appreciate the gesture. Oh, I appreciate it completely, I said, taking my seat at the table. Before we eat, though, I have something to share with all of you. Diane clapped her hands together excitedly. Are you finally ready to congratulate us on the house? I brought pictures of how we've decorated it. Actually, this is about the money you stole from me. Specifically, where that money came from. The cheerful atmosphere in the room shifted slightly, like a cloud passing over the sun. Patricia's smile became more forced, and Robert set down the carving knife with deliberate control. Alfredo, we've been through this, Robert said in his patient father voice. That money was sitting in your savings account doing nothing. Now it's helping your sister build a future. You're absolutely right, Papa. That money was just sitting there doing nothing, because it wasn't actually my money. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Marcus looked confused. Diane's eyes narrowed suspiciously, and my parents exchanged glances that told me they were trying to figure out what game I was playing. What do you mean it wasn't your money? Patricia asked carefully. I leaned back in my chair, completely relaxed for the first time in days. The money you stole was borrowed from my construction company's emergency equipment fund. I'm the manager of that account, and I had authorization to move funds temporarily for legitimate business purposes. Patricia's face went pale. You borrowed money from your company. I borrowed $47,000 6 months ago when I started getting suspicious about small withdrawals from my account. I moved my real savings to a different bank and replaced it with company funds to see if my suspicions were correct. Robert's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his water glass. What are you saying, son? I'm saying that the money you stole doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Morrison Construction Company. And since it was scheduled for automatic return to the company account this Friday, your theft will trigger a federal investigation into missing corporate funds. The room erupted in panicked voices. Diane stood up so quickly she knocked over her chair. You're lying. You're just trying to scare us. Marcus, show them your phone, I said calmly. Call the number for Morrison Construction and ask to speak to their accounting department. Ask them about their missing emergency fund. Marcus fumbled with his phone while everyone watched. After a brief conversation, his face went gray, and he slowly set the phone down on the table. They said the FBI is involved because it's interstate commerce fraud. The money was meant for equipment purchases across state lines. Patricia started crying, but these weren't the manipulative tears she had used before. These were tears of genuine terror. Alfredo, you have to fix this. You have to tell them it was a mistake. I can't fix it, Mama. The money is gone. You spent it on Diane's house. And since you used forged documents and false identity to access corporate funds, you've committed federal crimes. Robert stood up abruptly, his face flushed red with anger and panic. This is insane. You set us up. You deliberately trapped your own family. I protected myself from thieves who happened to be related to me, I corrected. You made the choice to steal. I just made sure there would be consequences for that choice. Diane was pacing back and forth, pulling at her hair. We have to sell the house. We have to give the money back right now. Too late for that, I said, checking my watch. The house purchase is under federal investigation as of this morning. All assets connected to the fraud are frozen until the investigation is complete. Marcus, who had been silent during most of this exchange, suddenly exploded with rage. You son of a bitch! You destroyed your own sister's life because you're petty and jealous. He started moving toward me aggressively, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo of a man in a suit sitting in a car across the street. That's Detective Williams from the Denver PD Financial Crimes Unit. He's been watching this house for the last 2 hours, waiting to see if anyone tries to threaten me or intimidate me into changing my story. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his face going white, as he realized how completely he had been outmaneuvered. You see, I continued conversationally. When someone steals corporate funds, there are protocols that have to be followed. The company has to report it to law enforcement within 72 hours. The FBI has to investigate because it involves interstate commerce. And anyone who threatens witnesses in a federal case faces additional felony charges. Patricia collapsed into her chair, sobbing openly. We didn't know. We thought it was your money. We never would have taken it if we knew it belonged to your company. You never asked where it came from. You just assumed you had the right to take it because you wanted something. Robert's authority facade finally crumbled completely. What's going to happen to us? That depends on a lot of factors. How much cooperation you provide, whether you have good lawyers, whether you can make restitution. But at minimum, you're looking at federal fraud charges, identity theft forgery, and conspiracy. And Diane, Patricia whispered. Diane received stolen property and benefited knowingly from fraud. She'll probably face charges too. Diane threw herself down on the couch dramatically. My life is ruined. Everything is ruined. No, I said, standing up from the table. Your life is finally catching up with your choices. This is what happens when you think you can take whatever you want without consequences. As I walked toward the front door, Patricia grabbed my arm desperately. Mijo, please. You have to help us. You can't let your family go to prison. I looked down at her tear-streaked face, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to steal from me, and then mock me for trusting you. But we love you. No, you love what I could provide for you. There's a difference. I pulled my arm free and walked out of the house where I had grown up, leaving behind the sounds of crying and arguing and panic. The cool evening air felt clean and fresh after the suffocating atmosphere inside. Detective Williams nodded at me from his car as I walked to my truck. The investigation was just beginning, but for the first time in a week, I felt like justice was possible. My phone buzzed with a text message from my attorney. Federal prosecutor wants to meet with you tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss your testimony. This is going exactly as we planned. I smiled as I drove home through the Denver streets, thinking about the new house I was going to buy with my real savings account, the one my family had never known existed. The federal prosecutor's office was located in a gleaming downtown building that seemed designed to intimidate people who found themselves on the wrong side of the law. As I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, I felt a mixture of nervous energy and satisfaction. For the first time in my adult life, I was about to see real consequences applied to people who had spent years exploiting my trust and generosity. Assistant Attorney Patricia Reynolds was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in white-collar crime. She greeted me in a conference room lined with law books and case files, spreading out documents across a polished table that reflected the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Mr. Alfredo, she said, shaking my hand firmly. I've reviewed your case file, and I have to say this is one of the most premeditated family fraud schemes I've seen in 15 years of prosecution. She opened a folder containing photocopies of Patricia's planning notebook, the forged loan documents and bank records showing the systematic theft over 8 months. Your mother's written documentation of the conspiracy is extraordinary evidence. Most criminals are smart enough not to keep detailed records of their crimes. My mother always was organized, I said with bitter irony. The private investigator you hired did excellent work as well. Reynolds continued pulling out a thick stack of photographs and financial records. He documented their spending patterns, their property searches, their meetings with real estate agents. We have a complete timeline of the conspiracy, from inception to execution. For the past 2 weeks, while my family thought they were getting away with their theft, I had been building an airtight case against them. The private investigator had followed them to jewelry stores, where they sold my grandmother's ring to banks, where they deposited cash payments to restaurants, where they celebrated their successful scheme with expensive meals. "What kind of charges are we looking at?" I asked. Reynolds flipped through her notes. "Your father faces federal fraud charges for the forged signatures conspiracy to commit theft and identity theft. Your mother faces the same charges plus money laundering for moving the stolen funds through multiple accounts. Your sister faces charges for receiving stolen property and participating in the conspiracy. The boyfriend faces charges if we can prove he knew the source of the funds. And what kind of sentences? Federal fraud charges carry serious penalties. First-time offenders usually face 2 to 5 years in prison, substantial fines, and full restitution. Your parents could also lose their house if they can't pay the fines and restitution amounts." The irony was perfect. They had stolen my money to buy Diane a house, and now they might lose their own house as a consequence. "There's something else you should know," Reynolds said, pulling out another document. "The bank has completed their internal investigation. They found that your mother used her joint account access to obtain confidential information about your other financial accounts, including your actual savings account at the different bank. She committed multiple federal banking violations. My blood went cold. She knows about my real savings. She tried to access that account yesterday using the same forged power of attorney documents. The bank flagged it immediately and reported the attempted fraud. We have her on security cameras trying to withdraw money that wasn't stolen. So even after being caught after facing federal charges, my mother had tried to steal even more money from me. Any lingering sympathy I might have felt evaporated completely. When will they be arrested? This afternoon. We'll execute arrest warrants simultaneously at 3 locations: your parents' house, your sister's house, and Marcus's workplace. We don't want to give them time to coordinate their stories or destroy evidence. I thought about the family dinner 3 nights ago, how they had tried to manipulate me with tears and guilt trips, while secretly planning to steal even more. They had no idea that every word they spoke was being recorded by the wire I wore under my shirt, that every threat Marcus made was being documented for use in court. Will you need me to testify at trial? Probably yes. But honestly, Mr. Alfredo, I expect most of them to take plea bargains, rather than risk going to trial with this much evidence against them. Your mother's notebook alone is enough to convict them of conspiracy. At exactly 2:30 that afternoon, my phone started buzzing with frantic calls from Patricia's number. I let them go to voicemail, listening later to increasingly desperate messages begging me to fix this mistake and tell the truth about the misunderstanding. At 4:15, Diane called screaming incoherently about FBI agents and handcuffs and how I had destroyed the family forever. Her voice was shrill with panic and rage, alternating between threats and pleading. At 6:30, Robert called from the county jail. His voice was hollow and defeated as he asked me to bail them out and talk to someone who could make this go away. When I didn't answer, he left a rambling message about how he had worked his whole life to provide for his family and didn't deserve to die in prison. But the most revealing call came from Marcus at 8:45. He had avoided arrest by claiming he had no knowledge of the fraud, but his voice was filled with cold fury as he left a message that would later be used as evidence of witness intimidation. You think you're so smart, Alfredo, but you have no idea what you've started. Your family might go to prison, but you still have to live in this community. People are going to know what you did to your own parents and sister. You're going to be known as the man who destroyed his family over money. Good luck living with that reputation. I forwarded the threatening message to Detective Williams and Attorney Reynolds. By morning, Marcus would be facing additional charges for intimidating a federal witness. That night, I sat in my small apartment with a bottle of beer and the deed to a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood 15 minutes from my construction sites. I had made an offer using my real savings, the money my family never knew existed, and the sellers had accepted immediately. The house had everything I had dreamed of during those years of careful saving: hardwood floors, a modern kitchen, a 2-car garage, and a backyard, perfect for barbecues, and maybe someday children playing on swing sets. But more importantly, it represented something my family's house never had: a place where trust wasn't a weakness to be exploited. My phone rang one more time that evening. It was Bill Hernandez from my father's former workplace, Alfredo. I heard about the arrests on the news. I want you to know that you did the right thing. It took courage to stand up to your family like that. It doesn't feel like courage, I admitted. It feels like I destroyed everything. You didn't destroy anything, son. They destroyed it when they chose to steal from you. You just made sure there were consequences. That's not cruelty. That's justice. After I hung up, I found myself thinking about my grandmother, whose ring they had sold for $800 to help fund their scheme. She would have been heartbroken to see how her family had turned out, but I thought she would have been proud that I finally stood up for myself. The next morning, I would start the process of building a new life, free from people who saw my love as an opportunity to be exploited. But for now, I was content to sit in the silence of my apartment, knowing that for the first time in my adult life, no one could steal my peace of mind. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my new house, making coffee in the early morning sunlight that streamed through windows I had paid for with my own honest work. The hardwood floors gleamed under my feet, and every room still smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. The legal proceedings had unfolded exactly as Attorney Reynolds predicted. Faced with overwhelming evidence of their crimes, my family had accepted plea bargains rather than risk lengthy prison sentences at trial. Patricia received 18 months of house arrest, 500 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full restitution of $47,000 plus interest. Robert received 2 years of probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and joint responsibility for the restitution. Diane faced the harshest consequences. Her beautiful house in Highlands Ranch was seized by federal marshals and sold at auction to help pay the restitution. She received 6 months in minimum security prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Marcus, who had indeed known about the stolen money, received similar charges after investigators found text messages between him and Diane, joking about fleecing the family sucker. But the most important outcome wasn't the legal consequences. It was what happened during the court-mandated family counseling sessions that Judge Morrison required as part of their sentencing. I had initially refused to participate, telling the social worker that I had no interest in rebuilding relationships with people who had shown such complete disrespect for me. But my attorney suggested that the counseling might help me find closure, so I agreed to attend a few sessions. The first session was held in a sterile conference room at the county courthouse, with a family therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen moderating. My parents sat on one side of the table, looking older and more fragile than I remembered, while I sat across from them feeling like a stranger in my own family. Alfredo. Dr. Chen said gently, "Your parents have asked to share something with you today." Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a handwritten letter, her fingers shaking as she unfolded the pages. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she began to read. "My dear son, I have spent 6 months thinking about what we did to you, and I am ashamed of the woman I became. When I wrote in that notebook and planned to take your money, I told myself I was being a good mother to Diane. But I was really being a terrible mother to you." She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "I taught you to work hard and be responsible, and trust your family. Then I used those good qualities against you. I stole your money and your trust and your grandmother's ring. But worst of all, I stole your belief that you deserved to be loved without being used. Robert cleared his throat and pulled out his own letter. Son, I failed you as a father. I was supposed to protect you and guide you and show you how to be a man. Instead, I showed you that being a man means being taken advantage of by people who should love you most. I taught you that your value to this family was measured by what you could provide, not who you are as a person. The letters continued for 20 minutes, detailing every way they had failed me and acknowledging the depth of damage they had caused. But these weren't the manipulative apologies they had tried before their arrests. These were the painful admissions of people who had been forced to confront the reality of their choices. Dr. Chen has been helping us understand how we justified our actions, Patricia continued. We told ourselves that family members should sacrifice for each other, but we only applied that rule to you. We told ourselves that you were strong enough to handle it, but we were really just making excuses for our selfishness. We understand if you never forgive us, Robert added. We understand if you never want to see us again. We just needed you to know that we finally see what we did, and we are genuinely sorry. Over the following months, the counseling sessions continued. My parents underwent individual therapy to address their enabling behaviors and financial irresponsibility. They attended classes about boundary respect and healthy family dynamics. Most importantly, they began working minimum wage jobs to pay their restitution, experiencing, for the first time, the kind of financial stress I had lived with for years while supporting them. Diane's transformation was even more dramatic. Prison had been a harsh wake-up call for someone who had spent her life believing the world owed her whatever she wanted. She lost 30 pounds, stopped wearing makeup, and started reading books about personal responsibility and financial literacy. When she was released, she moved into a small studio apartment and took a job at a grocery store. No more designer clothes, no more expensive dinners, no more boyfriends willing to fund her lifestyle. Marcus had broken up with her the day after her arrest, leaving her to face the consequences of their choices alone. The first time she visited my new house, she stood in my living room looking around with genuine amazement, rather than the entitled envy I expected. It's beautiful, Alfredo, she said quietly. You did this all by yourself, didn't you? With your own money, your own work, your own planning. Yes, I said, still wary of her motives. I never understood before what that meant. When we took your money from my house, I thought it was just numbers moving around. I didn't realize it represented years of sacrifice and dreams and planning. She sat down carefully on my couch, as if she was afraid of damaging something. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what we took from you. The conversation that followed was the most honest one Diane and I had ever had. She told me about the reality of prison, where her charm and beauty meant nothing, and where she had to confront the fact that she had never developed any real skills or work ethic. She described the shame of having other inmates mock her for being a spoiled princess who went to prison for stealing from her own brother, but she also told me about the books she had read, and the classes she had taken, and the job she was working where she earned her paycheck through actual effort rather than manipulation. For the first time in her life, she was supporting herself completely, and she was discovering a sense of pride she had never experienced before. I know I can't undo what we did, she said. But I want to try to become someone worthy of being your sister again. Not because I want anything from you, but because I want to prove to myself that I can be better than the person who hurt you. Today, 2 years after the theft that changed everything, my relationship with my family is slowly healing. Not the old relationship built on my role as the responsible provider, but a new relationship built on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. My parents have paid back every penny of their restitution, working extra shifts and living modestly for the first time in years. Diane has been promoted twice at her job and is saving money for her own apartment. Most importantly, they have all learned to respect my choices and boundaries. When I said I needed time before resuming family dinners, they accepted that without argument. When I explained that I would never again give them access to my finances or personal information, they understood. When I told them that rebuilding trust would take years of consistent behavior, they committed to that process without expecting immediate forgiveness. Last month, Diane called to tell me she had saved enough money to buy a modest engagement ring for herself, not because any man was proposing, but because she wanted to celebrate her commitment to building a better life. It was a small symbol, but it represented her transformation from someone who took whatever she wanted to someone who earned what she needed. Patricia has become a volunteer counselor for other families dealing with financial fraud, using her experience to help people understand the real cost of betraying family trust. Robert has returned to part-time work in city maintenance, contributing to his community rather than just taking from it. As for me, I've learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. True family members don't exploit your generosity. They celebrate your success and support your dreams. The people who truly care about you want to see you thrive, not sacrifice your happiness for their benefit. I've also learned that protecting yourself from people who would harm you isn't cruel or selfish, even when those people are family members. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their choices and allow them to face the consequences that teach them to make better decisions. Standing in my kitchen this morning, looking out at the backyard where I'm planning to build a deck this summer, I feel a peace I never experienced during those years when I was trying to please everyone else at my own expense. I built this life with my own hands and my own choices, and no one can take it away from me, because I never gave them the power to do so. My phone buzzes with a text from Diane. Working double shift today to finish saving for my car down payment. Hope you're having a great morning, big brother. I smile as I text back. Proud of you for working so hard. Want to come over for barbecue this weekend? It's a small thing, this invitation, but it represents something that was impossible 2 years ago, a relationship between equals who respect each other's boundaries and celebrate each other's achievements. That's what real family looks like. The lesson I want to share is this. Your love and generosity are precious gifts that should be treasured, not exploited. Anyone who tries to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself from theft or abuse is showing you exactly why those protections are necessary. Real family members don't steal from you and then call it love. They don't use your trust as a weapon against you. They don't mock your pain or threaten your reputation when you stand up for yourself. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love most, but that doesn't mean we have to accept that hurt. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to protect your resources and your dreams. You have the right to expect honesty and respect from the people in your life, regardless of how you're related to them. And when someone shows you who they really are through their choices and actions, believe them the first time. Don't wait for them to steal your savings, or forge your signature, or sell your grandmother's ring. Trust is earned through consistent behavior, over time not assumed because of shared DNA or childhood memories. I learned these lessons the hard way, but I'm grateful for them now. They taught me the difference between being loved for who I am and being valued for what I can provide. They showed me that genuine relationships are built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. Most importantly, they gave me the courage to build a life where my kindness is appreciated rather than exploited. What about you? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't respect you? Have you learned to tell the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and building the life you deserve. Remember, you're worth more than what you can provide for other people, and anyone who truly loves you will understand that. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to protect your own dreams and boundaries. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember that you deserve relationships built on love and respect, not manipulation and exploitation.